All right, in this section, we're going to talk all about how stress is related to both mental and physical health. So, the first thing to kind of talk about in this regard is the diathesis stress model. And this specifically kind of states this idea that how stress affects us is also related not only to the experiences that we undergo, but also our sort of innate biology that is predisposed to react to these situations. So, as you can see here on this graph, on the bottom line, we have sort of our predisposition for stress, and then vertically, we see the actual stress that we undergo. And so, if this sort of together crosses over this threshold, we see that the disorder is actually manifested. And so that would be here, sort of in this orange area, where if there is a high enough level of predisposition for the disease, it doesn't require much stress to actually activate. Whereas if there's a lower predisposition, then there needs to be a high amount of stress to actually fall within this range where the disorder is manifested. Whereas on the other hand, if we have a low disposition for stress in the first place, we're able to handle much higher amounts of stress and still not have that disorder be manifested until we reach higher thresholds. So this kind of model shows this relationship in how predisposition for how we manage stress can affect the likelihood of some disorder being manifested based on the amount of stress that we actually undergo. Stress also has a really major factor in mental health. So we can see this relationship again by looking at sort of how stressors are related to psychological disorders. And we know that psychological stressors are a major risk factor for psychological disorders. That's one of the main commonalities we see amongst different psychological disorders, that being high levels of psychological stressors. Interestingly, stressors that involve social rejection or social isolation tend to be major risk factors for types of depression. Having that social isolation tends to be a risk factor for depression specifically. And then also childhood stressors we see as something that kind of persists and maintains. And even if that stressor maybe goes away, we can see some of those disorders or those symptoms of the stressor maintained throughout later life points. When we talk about the effects of stress on our physical health, we can see this distinguished both between acute stressors and chronic stressors. So remember, acute stressors take place under short time windows and oftentimes are due to some specific event or situation that someone is undergoing. And so we can see people with different health problems or acute illnesses that those can actually manifest to stronger degrees when stress is also present. So if you happen to be sick or have an illness, that could be worsened by undergoing acute stressors. On the other hand, we also see chronic stressors playing a major role in overall health as well. We could see more long-term effects on our health like cardiovascular disease or autoimmune disorders, and both of these again might be triggered or worsened by chronic stressors that persist over longer periods of time. And so there's two kind of main factors of chronic stress and how they influence our biology and our health long term. And the two things that kind of play a role here are number one, chronic inflammation. So having stress on your body increases inflammation in different regions of the body, and that inflammation takes a negative toll on different systems and aspects of our body and our health. And so this chronic inflammation or constant inflammation prolongs and worsens these effects because we're undergoing them for longer, more prolonged periods of time. And then we can also look at how this affects our biological aging. So these stressors can actually influence our genetics and how that affects our body's aging process. So if you weren't aware, the way the body sort of undergoes aging is through what are called telomeres. So telomeres are basically like, you can think of them as almost like little caps on the ends of our DNA that protect the important part of the DNA from having damage or degrading over time. And as we age, those telomeres begin to shorten. So we have less protection as we get older. Some of these stressors can act to actually speed up this process of wearing down those telomeres. So then different parts of our DNA within our cells can actually be vulnerable to damage and have other issues occur due to this vulnerable nature to them. And I think this is just really interesting to kind of understand and look at. And some newer research looking at these telomeres is actually looking for ways to how we can add on or lengthen our telomeres to increase the protection of our DNA within our cells to have less chance of that DNA having damage done to it, which often can cause malformations, or cancer-like diseases and progressions. So overall here we see stress being this major negative factor biologically, and we can see these actual physical effects that take place due to both acute and chronic stressors over periods of time.